Hello, and welcome to Flicksplained, the channel where we take your favorite flicks and series and break them down to ensure you don't miss a single detail.
Until they've used it.
Christopher Nolan's new biopic Oppenheimer is set to hit theaters on July 21st, 2023, and it's going to be an explosive movie, to say the least. With a film based on one of the most notable scientists in the history of the United States, there's a lot for the movie to cover. And thanks for the first trailer, which was released a few weeks ago, we have a pretty good idea for the tone of the movie. So today, we're going to break down the trailer and take a look at everything you need to know about Oppenheimer before it hits theaters. Make sure you stick around until the end to find out how Nolan shot the nuclear explosion scene during the Trinity test without using CGI, Nolan's newest masterpiece. When Christopher Nolan first announced that he was working on a biographical film based on the life of J. Robert Oppenheimer, fans were excited to see what he had in store. All we knew for a while was the film was set to follow the life of the theoretical physicist who ended up becoming the Los Alamos laboratory director during the time of the Manhattan Project. After all, who could have had a more interesting life than the man whose contributions directly led to the creation and first successful detonation of the atomic bomb? However, Nolan has been very quiet about his upcoming film, and after watching the trailer, we can see why. This movie is going to be absolutely epic. And though it might not be packed with action like a lot of movies are nowadays, it's going to bring a perspective to something that literally affected the entire world that none of us have ever gotten to see before. The breakdown. The tension created by Nolan and Oppenheimer could be felt as soon as the trailer began. It opened on a close-up shot of an explosion with the sound of flames roaring and the sight of sparks and dark clouds filling the screen. It's hard to tell, but it's likely that this is our first look at Nolan's depiction of the Trinity test, which was the first successful detonation of an atomic bomb in history. The Trinity test took place in Yolanda del Muerto, a testing site located about 200 miles south of Los Alamos, New Mexico, on July 16, 1945. Following the roaring flames, the trailer gave us our first glimpse at Cillian Murphy as J. Robert Oppenheimer, or at least as I. And as his narration began, the tone for the film was set. Just by the first line, you can tell that Nolan's Oppenheimer will be touching on the moral and psychological dilemmas that plagued the scientists who worked on the Manhattan Project. On the one hand, they knew that they needed to build a weapon that would not only cripple their enemies, but also ensure that they never went on the offensive again. And on the other hand, the creators of the bomb were the only ones who could imagine the scale of the destruction that they will be putting into the hands of man. And that was terrifying. That sense of moral division could be felt as Oppenheimer began to say, "We imagine a future, and our imaginings horrify us. They won't fear it until they understand it, and they won't understand it until they've used it." As the trailer went on, we got a nice aerial shot of the testing site, showing us how far away from civilization it was. And after that, we got our first look at Nolan's depiction of the atomic bomb, aka the gadget. J. Robert Oppenheimer was shown staring at his creation as the plutonium and uranium core was encased in its tomb of charges that would ensure the plutonium received enough pressure during the explosion to create the proper reaction for the nuclear explosion. The scene then transitioned to show a large glass bowl of marbles sitting beside a smaller glass cup that was also full of marbles. This is likely going to be a scene that takes place in a college classroom, most likely Berkeley, and it's going to be demonstrating nuclear fission in a safe and practical manner. After that, we got another look at light and particles swirling and dancing around each other, which is Nolan's way of showing us the beauty of the universe on an atomic level, but also the horrors as those lights quickly turned to explosions. We then got a few more glimpses of Cillian Murphy's Oppenheimer looking really lost in thought and anxious. I mean, you can really see that his character is going to be having a lot of internal struggles just by looking on his face throughout the trailer. We can then see Oppenheimer and a few of his team members ducking out in the desert as an unexpected explosion went off on the other side of the barrier that they were standing behind. This then led to a few more shots of Oppenheimer looking lost in stress-fueled thought, and then a montage of scenes depicting the gadget being loaded up and prepared for the Trinity test. And as the montage continued, the trailer showed us various glimpses of the actual explosion used for Nolan's version of the test, including a shot of a man who was on site putting sunglasses on as he literally dripped with sweat. This is fairly accurate, because it was reported that the viewing site heated up as if it were an oven after the explosion, and the sky lit up so brightly that it was practically blinding. The trailer ended with the title Oppenheimer slowly scrolling across a black screen, followed by the release date, which was displayed by the pacing of a Geiger counter, which was a detail that I absolutely loved. Oppenheimer has a stacked cast. Now, despite the trailer mainly focusing on Cillian Murphy's character, Oppenheimer is actually powered by a star-studded cast to help ensure that it becomes one of the best movies of the year. We spoke a bit about Cillian Murphy and the fact that he'll be portraying the title figure of the film, J. Robert Oppenheimer. But did you know that this movie marks the 6th time that the actor and the director have teamed up to create something epic? The pair began their work together when Cillian took on the role of Dr. Jonathan Crane, aka the Scarecrow, in Nolan's 2005 box office hit Batman Begins. He then went on to appear in other classics created by the director, such as Dunkirk and Inception. Most people will also recognize Murphy from his portrayal of Thomas Shelby, the lead character in the series Peaky Blinders. But Cillian's not the only cast member that's going to help push this film to make a bang. Robert Downey Jr. is going to make an appearance in the film as Lewis Strauss, an American businessman, philanthropist, and naval officer who was actually one of the founding members of the US Atomic Energy Commission. Interestingly enough, Strauss was not a fan of Oppenheimer and often disagreed with his politics. You can actually hear Robert Downey Jr.'s voice as Lewis Strauss at the end of the first teaser for the movie, saying the line, "We made him the most important man who ever lived. The man who moved the earth." Then you have Emily Blunt, who's taking on the role of Oppenheimer's wife, Katherine Oppenheimer, also known as Kitty. Blunt is one of the best actresses in the field right now, and has a long list of credits to show for it. From starring in the instant horror classic A Quiet Place, to fighting alongside Tom Cruise in The Edge of Tomorrow, I get hyped up over anything that she's in. And I can't wait to see how she portrays the German-American biologist Kitty Oppenheimer. Matt Damon is set to play the boss of Oppenheimer, General Leslie Groves. Groves was the man who was officially in charge of and directed the Manhattan Project, and one of the few people Oppenheimer really had to answer to. We also have Gary Oldman, who's going to be playing the part of President Truman, and much like Robert Downey Jr.'s character, he might not have been seen in the teaser or the trailer, but he can be heard. In the original teaser, he said Truman's iconic quote, "The force from which the sun draws its power has been loosed against those who brought war to the Far East," which was said following the bombing of Hiroshima. Joining all of them, we have Florence Pugh as Jean Tatlock, Jack Quaid as Richard Feynman, as well as Kenneth Branagh and Rami Malek as characters who have not yet been announced. As of right now, Oppenheimer is set to have a runtime of about 2.5 hours, and with a cast this amazing, our eyes are going to be glued to the screens. And from what the reports are saying, the filming of the movie was in itself a work of art, so one can only imagine what the actual movie is going to be like. Shooting the Trinity test without CGI. Christopher Nolan pulled out all the stops when he began shooting Oppenheimer. One of the biggest scenes in the movie, and one of the biggest moments in US history, is the Trinity test. We mentioned before that this was the first ever successful detonation of a nuclear bomb, and was what ultimately gave the United States access to atomic bombs, and one of the biggest moments in J. Robert Oppenheimer's life. And knowing that, Nolan understood that he had to go big with that scene, and according to the headlines, he did just that. Various articles from Variety to Complex have written articles with headlines along the lines of, "Christopher Nolan recreated a nuclear weapon explosion without CGI." Now, just by reading those headlines, your mind might jump to the conclusion that the US government decided that it would be okay for them to give a Hollywood director a nuclear weapon and let him set it off in the desert. But don't worry, we might live in crazy times, but not that crazy. After reading the articles and listening to interviews with Nolan, it's clear that he meant that he recreated the nuclear explosion on camera in practical ways. What this most likely means is that Nolan and his team figured out a way to work around the weather conditions and make a massive explosion. Then, by catching the explosion at the right angles with the right cameras, the filmmakers can make it appear as intense as the explosion that occurred during the Trinity test. Christopher Nolan used 65mm IMAX film to shoot the movie, including the explosion that he set off in New Mexico to recreate the original atomic bomb. But what's even cooler than that is the fact that some of the scenes in Oppenheimer are going to be in black and white. Now, I know what you're thinking. What? Black and white? What is this, the 50s? But it's actually really interesting, because that makes Oppenheimer the first movie ever to use black and white footage that was shot on an IMAX camera. Now, we might be weird for getting hyped about that, but hey, what are you most excited to see in Christopher Nolan's upcoming biopic? Be sure to let us know in the comments section below. And if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to check out our channel for more Flicks Playing Magic.